Writer's block. Is it a thing? This is something that is often debated in the writing community, and the answers sort of vary. I've made a video about it before, and my answer to is writer's block a thing was because the truth is that I don't believe in insurmountable writer's block. I don't believe that if you're just not feeling it, if you're just not in the mood, that should be an acceptable answer. I deal with writer's block a lot, but I think writer's block has been mystified and made mythic and made far more important than I think it really is. I think if we examine what writer's block is, we'd probably determine that it's pretty close to what procrastination is, at least how we discussed it last week. It's a general feeling that what you have to say isn't good or isn't working. And that can happen. I'm not going to tell you that this is not a legitimate feeling that writers do not feel. They do. This is something that they are dealing with pretty often. Heck, they made a whole Spider-Man movie about how when you're really not feeling well emotionally and you're seeing your ex-girlfriend going off and marrying someone else, you lose your superpowers, which is something that a writer would come up with as a problem for a person. And it has an element of truth. If you aren't feeling your best, that can manifest and hit your writing. But writer's block can happen for a lot of reasons. Today I'm going to talk about the 4 ways I handle writer's block when it hits me. Number 1 is outlining. I don't want to say that I don't get writer's block when I have an outlined story, but it's easier for me to navigate. For example, right now I am working on a short story, and I went through in advance and I broke down every scene, and I typed up those scenes as note cards in Scrivener. They're essentially scene cards, but the nice thing about Scrivener is that each of those cards can be turned into a scene. So I just click on it, I get the blank page, and I type up everything that I know is going to happen in that scene. The nice thing about doing an outline is that you know how each scene is supposed to end. I try to get much more detailed every time I outline because I find it so much simpler to be able to go in and have already laid out the blueprints, the instructions for what a scene is supposed to be and what it's supposed to do and what its function is in the story. That allows me to go in and just put the scene together based on those components because I've already done the heavy lifting. Of course, you can get writer's block when you're doing outlining, when you're trying to figure out how the pieces go together, and I should talk about that another time. But when we say writer's block, we're generally thinking of that blank page. We're generally thinking about, I don't know how to start writing what I want to write today. My second trick is to spin my wheels, or more charitably, to indulge myself. This can happen when I'm setting up the scene. Usually when a scene starts and I don't know where to start the scene, when I'm not sure how to begin, how to get an entry point, I'll just start by describing the room. And I will give a lot of detail and a lot of context. And that is a way to get up to the number of words I'm supposed to have written during the day, even though in the back of my mind I know a lot of those words are going to go away. That's okay, because you have still written during the day, and maybe you only had a day where you described a lamp. That's okay if you wrote 1,100 words and you got through the day and that was your writing goal. That's not bad. The other thing I will do is when I'm introducing a side character, I'll really relish it. I will take my time. I will give anecdotes and backstory, all of which I am willing to bet is going to get cut out. But it helps me get a sense of the character. It feels productive. It feels like writing. It may be in the story. It's usually got sort of a Douglas Adams vibe where I'm kind of going way too deep down a rabbit hole that maybe the audience would have or maybe they wouldn't, but isn't necessarily necessary. For that reason, I'm willing to say a lot of that stuff is going to get cut when it comes to time to do the editing. But again, it allows you to write. You're not staring at a blank page saying, I don't know what to do. You're writing something knowing that your future self will make it better, and you just need to get some words on the page to get past the hurdle. That brings me to my sidebar. Trust that your future self will edit out the stuff that sucks. I know, last week I did a video and I mentioned that your future self isn't a real thing. That's really more for procrastination. When you're saying this is something my future self is going to deal with and you're not writing or you're not doing whatever it is you need to do, That's bad. It's different when you are writing, because when you're writing and you're thinking to yourself, this sucks, this is terrible, you have to set aside all of that. You have to focus on getting it done. The best way I know to do that is to say, my future self will know what to do. And in this case, I think that's true, because your future self has something you don't have, and it's perspective. Once you've finished writing a story, you need to take some time away from it. And then when you come back to it, weeks, months, ideally months later, you are not as attached to all the things that happened. You're not attached to the week that you spent laboring over a scene. If it's not working, you have enough context of perspective to say, that needs to go. Trust that you will be able to edit it later. And if you can't, that is a skill you need to develop. That is one that I am currently working on, is my editing self and my drafting self. I'm working on a lot of my skills right now. If you can figure out that skill, if you can remember that there is going to be a version of you someday who does not remember the labor pains of the book, at least you will remember them, but they won't cloud your judgment, that goes a huge way to reducing writer's block. Number 3, ignore your first line. There's a lot of pressure on the first line of a story. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The man in black ran across the desert and the gunslinger followed. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. These are mythical first lines. I mean, famously, the Hobbit only existed because that concept, that sentence, just occurred to J.R.R. Tolkien while he was grading, and he just wrote it down, and that was the beginning of that story. Granted, he had been working on Middle-earth for quite some time and writing a whole language, but that's kind of my point. There's this mythic element to great first lines, and they're a myth, because in most cases, Tolkien as an exception, they weren't the first thing that was written. Or even if they were, they may not have been exactly as they are now. Yes, your first line is important, but the final version of that first line does not need to be the first thing that you write when you're telling your story. I still run into this problem. I managed to figure out a really good first line when I was working on a short story this month, and that was really exciting. But I am coming at this with the context of knowing that if I hadn't come up with a great first line, I would have just had to keep writing. Again, you can always go back once the story is done, when you know the best opening, and figure out how your story really should begin. Like I mentioned in my writing strengths video, my strength is not beginnings. My strength is endings. I have a much easier time with final lines than I do with first lines. So from my perspective, I think it is very helpful just to bear in mind the beginning doesn't matter when you're starting. Come back to it later, spend as much time on it as you need. It is not the important part of drafting. A general note, sidebar number 2, if you like, perfection is the enemy of done. The more time you spend laboring over every sentence, the longer it's going to take to finish, because that is how that works. And the reason why you have to divorce yourselves from perfection is because it's the only way you're going to finish. And my 4th tip, and this is the worst case scenario: break glass in case of emergency, copy something else. Just start writing. I'm going to borrow this advice from the film Finding Forrester, which, by the way, is pretty cliche and generic, but also I still think kind of underrated. There's a sequence in that film when the mentor is training the mentee and giving him advice on writing. The mentee does not know where to start, so the mentor, Sean Connery, gives him something he'd already written, something that had never, as far as he knew, never been published, and presented it and said, just start writing, start copying my words until you find your own. Once you feel your own words, ignore the paper and just start writing those instead. Now, it's very important that when you do this, once you are done, you delete the part where you copied anything. That is, in fact, one of the primary conflicts in Finding Forrester, and well, you should see the movie. It's enjoyable. Don't leave in anything that you copied from anywhere else. This is so important. Don't leave it in. Don't even use it as anything necessary. Just use it as a springboard, using it as a jumping off point only. I recommend this with a heavy caveat. I don't do this, but this is my advice to you. If you are completely tapped, If none of the other things I've suggested work for you, just start with something that already exists. Start writing it just to feel the rhythm of the keys. Eventually, you will feel yourself writing something else. Your brain is going to wander as you copy over the text, and that's going to give you ideas of what else to work on. Close that window, leave it alone, start writing your thing. It depends a lot on what you're writing. This is exceptionally hard to do with fiction because it could be just plagiarism. Don't do that. Probably just don't do this fourth step, if I'm honest. Like, just don't mess with plagiarism. It's not a good idea. But, like, if you're completely out of ideas, use that. It worked in the film until he didn't delete the part that was from the, from the existing work. Didn't work then. I mean, it's a good movie. That is it for me today. If you liked the video, leave the like button. Leave the like button? Well, thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, press the thumbs up button because that one is called the like button. And that's how I know the thing that I just said about you is true, that you liked it. If you want to see more videos, you can subscribe. There's a button called subscribe, and that's how that one works. There's a bell, and that one isn't called notifications. It's just called the bell. But you will get notifications if you ring the bell. So that's pretty cool, even though it's not labeled. And let me know in the comments what you do to tackle writer's block, or if you know of any of these techniques that do not work for you. That's cool too. Let's talk about that. That fourth one might not work. It might be bad. It's kind of plagiarism. It is plagiarism. Stay safe, whether you are staying at home sick or out protesting. Wash your hands. And I love you, Victoria.